Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Kostic-Kane. I'm an assistant professor in the Center for Medical Ethics and Health Policy at Baylor College of Medicine. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about how we expect our kind of repertoire of AI ethics to kind of shift as AI continues to get better. So as we all know, AI is everywhere now. We're all hearing about generative AI, how it promises to transform basically everything, including healthcare. And so generative AI, large language models, transformer architectures, all these things have catapulted AI beyond what you might call narrow or kind of task-specific computations to now handle challenges that require more kind of general reasoning ability. So the same foundation models that can ace a medical exam can also advance drug discovery or analyze medical images or automatically draft pathology reports. So AI systems are really starting to reason persuasively, about medical cases and risk assessments at a level that's really starting to raise some eyebrows. So, and they're even getting quite good at tasks requiring empathy and deliberation. These are things that, have been distinctly the territory, the jurisdiction of humans, or so we thought, right? And so in AI, of course, as we all know, is becoming more multimodal as well. So meaning they can translate a query from, one medium like natural language into another medium like gene mutations and then back again, vice versa. And that allows doctors and physicians to kind of identify patterns across different types of data, a variety of different types of data, without having to meticulously cross-label things. And that saves a lot of time. That's a real game changer. And that makes them more versatile and smarter as well. So these new capacities are really starting to drastically change our relationship to AI. Most of us didn't have a relationship to AI before, right? But now we all do, and that's happening fast. And so all the literature from AI ethics, kind of pre-Chat GPT emphasizes the need to critically evaluate AI for accuracy, trustability, fairness, interpretability, all these principles that are often associated with AI ethics and responsible AI. And the prevailing view is that we should use these systems with extreme caution, with skepticism. We should have strict criteria for trustworthiness for these systems, given all the potentials for algorithmic bias and other forms of inaccuracy. So we should also battle against things like automation bias, which is like the tendency to over-rely on automated systems. And we should, of course, never fully rely on these systems in clinical decision-making, and always keep a human or physician in our case, or some clinical or some kind of human in the loop, right? And keep patients' and physicians' perspectives at the center of care. So, but already these dynamics are starting to change. And the better these systems get, of course, then the more we're inclined to rely on them in our work. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? We want them to kind of take over this laborious process of writing up patient encounters or kind of writing up petitions for pre-authorization to send to insurance companies, that sort of thing. We want them to be able to kind of suggest what factors might be considered when selecting a treatment path for a patient, but we don't want them to automatically select that pathway. We don't want to replace physicians or clinical teams, especially not for critical healthcare decisions or where that kind of human touch remains central in care. So everybody agrees on this stuff. There's pretty much no, contestation around this stuff. So, but what decisions and circumstances are these really? And what clinical decisions should be more human-heavy versus more AI-heavy? And what role do we really want to allow AI to have in these different clinical applications, right? So do we want to say, on the one hand, yes to things like drug discovery, but no to automated clinical decision-making, or yes to identifying abnormalities in MRI, scans or something, but no to making the final call on brain surgery or something like that, right? So we don't really have yet a moral code to guide these kinds of decisions. And that kind of delineation gets trickier the better that these systems get. So it's kind of a no-brainer to say, we need to keep a human in the loop when these systems are imperfect. That seems logical, right? That's not a matter of ethics. That's a matter of rationality, right? So you wouldn't want to rely totally on a system that doesn't always get it right. So, but what happens when that window of inaccuracy begins to narrow a little bit? This is a nice image from some researchers at Epic and MIT and Northeastern who showed that the predictive capacity of large language models are actually getting better as compute size increases, and also these systems are getting more and more efficient on less power, so requiring roughly 2 times less power every 8 months. So that's some significant progress there. So what's to stop these systems from just continuing to improve? And in the last 2 years, we would say exponentially, right? I don't know if that's going to continue that trend, but, and what will we do then when we see that they're getting actually really good at what we want them to be doing? And of course, there are like lots of AI critics. These are not only AI critics, but AI, developers as well. Just noticed that they're all talking with their hands. But, there's definitely critics who say that we're really still far away from reliable, trustworthy AI, accurate AI, and things like that. So, but if you consider that right now, right this very second, there are people all over the world's best AI engineers trying to solve, the biggest problems that plague AI right now. The main one, of course, being hallucinations, right? So the tendency for generative AI systems to kind of create these outputs that are not grounded in reality or in the original training data sets. And so it seems like the system's just kind of like making it up, right? And hallucinations are, of course, a massive problem in something like healthcare or any kind of high stakes domain, right? Where it can lead to all kinds of bad things like you see on the screen that can potentially harm patients and introduce significant liability considerations for physicians and institutions. So it's no surprise then that there's a massive industry around reducing hallucinations. So there's lots of effort in this area. And people are doing all kinds of things to address this. So improving the quality of data sets, integrating fact-checking mechanisms, refining attention mechanisms. Transformer architecture is a form of, attention mechanism itself. Integrating external knowledge sources. Some of you might have heard of retrieval augmented generation, RAG for short. That kind of stuff is really starting to shift hallucinations. Not so much in ChatGPT like all of us use maybe for, if you have 3.5 or 4.0 or 4.0 or whatever it is that you're using. But, the people who are doing this kind of stuff on a expert level are using RAG to change things. Actually, I think the next talk will be talking about this as well. So, and of course, there's, some super secretive, the Q-star program that people have been talking about. This is essentially a new approach that entails giving the model a mirror and letting it do these kind of mental gymnastics on its own until it problem solves the right answer. And this as well, apparently dramatically reduces hallucinations for those people who have had access to the system. So, and even makes it kind of champion level good at math, which is something that LLMs have been notoriously really bad at, right? So we are still seeing a lot of movement going really quickly. Just word to the wise, this is not investment advice, but people are saying that Q-star is probably behind, OpenAI's next release there, so we can look forward to that. There's also a lot of things that are limiting, of course, AI's potential to continue to skyrocket in the same way that we've seen in the last 2 years. I don't have time to go into all of them now, but the short story is really that we're starting to run up against some of the laws of physics, right? The fact that there's, a limit to how many transistors we can fit on one single microchip and not only fit, but cool, right? So NVIDIA's Blackwell GPU, that's the largest chip that's physically possible using today's technology, and that is very hard to cool. You imagine all of those in one spot, right? And there are economic constraints too, so the cost of R&D that's involved in developing and manufacturing semiconductors is growing exponentially, not to mention, the fact that there's probably limitations on the amount of energy that nations are willing to allocate towards, AI in the future, especially as maybe environmental considerations might be a competing priority at some point. And it looks like as well, we'll even start to probably exhaust, according to the study, the amount of high-quality training data by 2026, that's available on the internet. So we've already started, of course, synthesizing new data to use and to train LLMs, but critics have said that this kind of like making a copy of a copy or sort of inbreeding, and the quality of the model suffers afterwards. So maybe we're reaching the limits, maybe not. Maybe something like the transformer architecture or something else like that is going to come along, or maybe Sam Altman's strawberry will knock our socks off. We don't know yet, or maybe there's a lot of other things that people aren't really talking about in the mainstream right now, but that are actively moving things forward too. So things you see here, Yoshua Bengio is really at the forefront of this, as is Chris Ray and some other folks. So they're working on things like liquid neural networks, subquadratic scaling, all this stuff. So even if the next generation of AI models never actually reaches perfection, they're likely to someday be near perfect at certain tasks. And some of those tasks are going to be exactly the tasks that we want them, that we're looking for in clinical applications. So clinical tasks that require extremely high levels of accuracy, risk prediction, diagnostic classification. At some level, we have to just imagine that they're going to get really good at these things. So, and where will that leave our AI ethics at that point? Because if you look at, sorry for the slide, it got a little bit lost in translation with Google Slides, but if you look at kind of what we consider to be AI ethics, what we call AI ethics at this point, a majority of our tenets so far kind of focus on all the limitations of AI systems, all the bad things that can happen if you use these imperfect systems in imperfect ways. But what are we going to do when AI really starts actually behaving the way that we want it to behave? When concerns around accuracy and relevance and even privacy, reliability, explainability, maybe even these systems will become explainable. When those kinds of things start to become worries of the past, like what starts to happen when we develop an AI code of ethics or something that focuses on AI's strengths rather than its limitations. And then I think that's when really some of the trickier ethical questions are going to become truly challenging. How much should we really lean on AI systems that might reason a little bit more objectively than we do in some cases, or deliver information that can maybe improve longevity or health status, by some measures? So should we dive head in, should we dive in like head first, or should we be a little bit more restrained in some cases, but not in others? It's probably not too early to start thinking about what kinds of scenarios these kinds of things might be, because we want to be able to decide things. This is another slide that got lost in translation, sorry. But we want to decide things more deliberately and not kind of on the fly in the same way that we just reacted to other technologies like social media, which is another thing that substantively changed the dynamics of human relationships, right? We want to focus on these things in a deliberative sort of way. So in which situations do we actually, sorry, I forgot down is forward. In which situations do we actually lean on super powerful AI, and in which situations might we want to check them at the door? So, for example, critical life or death situations. These are decisions that don't just, consider clinical probabilities, but they're deeply value laden, So there's no right or wrong answer. So the concept of accuracy is sort of moot in some ways. So there's also mental health diagnosis and treatment. That's an area, that's my main area of study. There's this huge industry around developing these AI systems that automatically and directly detect mood and affect and other behavioral indicators of mental health using a combination of, computer sensors, biosensors, computer vision, digital health tools. And so, but what are some of the kind of psychosocial and dignity implications or consequences of allowing AI to detect these potentially stigmatizing conditions, right? And especially the conditions that might be prodromal or may be asymptomatic at the time of inference. What about situations that require some kind of awareness of social or cultural or community dynamics? Like, for example, if you've got a system that detects the existence of psychopathology in a child, there's a lot of there's a lot of physicians and parents that kind of hold off on a diagnosis for young children to avoid negative impacts on identity or developmental impacts, identity formation, things like that. So that take into account a specific patient's, clinical history, their psychosocial characteristics, their family dynamics, their, community dynamics, things like that, community setting. Could AI ever get to a point where it is able to take into consideration all of these different factors? And would we even want it to? I mean, is that something that we want to delegate to AI systems? I'm not sure about that yet. So the point is that the ethical challenges that are likely to surround this newer generation of AI that's coming down the pike might require kind of a different ethical calculus than what we're typically used to, what we've been talking about, which is, of course, all about the limitations of AI. But the coming era of AI, I think, is going to have to focus more on the kind of ethics of human choice, about how we want to integrate these systems deliberately, thoughtfully into our, into our healthcare and our interactions with these machines. So going forward, this choice is not going to be very obvious. I see I'm at time. I'm almost done. Because kind of the right versus wrong ways of using AI will depend less on the features of the systems themselves, their performance capacities and all that, and more on the context and the characteristics of the users and the use context. So, for example, like the cultural norms and expectations about the role that we want these machines to play in human decision making, that has nothing to do necessarily with accuracy, but has a lot to do potentially with meaning and human-to-human relationships. And I know that point is often belabored, the human touch and all that stuff, but that's not to be underestimated, I think. It's not just about the human touch. It's like, in some ways that these AI systems are going to be applicable, or we want them to take a certain role, and other times we want them to like butt out, or epistemic considerations, like whose lived experiences do we really want to prioritize? There's the epistemology that we see from these models, but there's also other epistemologies that may be considered equally valid, even if not equally accurate, right? Or about like the felt authenticity of clinical decisions that are made from computers, right? So some people might be turned off by the idea of these non-empathic beings being the ones that are doing so much of the heavy lifting of clinical decision making, and might feel like ultimately their clinical decision, they don't put as much stock into it, or they regret it, or there's like decisional regret things to consider. So anyway, I'm more of an optimist about AI in clinical work than a pessimist, but I do think we should be collectively considering what AI ethics is going to look like in a world where accuracy and trustworthiness and all the things that we talk about, all the limitations of AI, do become concerns of the past, right? So, and it's in that world that we're going to be forced to reflect on what role we want AI to play in our very human decisions. So here's a couple works cited. I'm happy to share these after, and feel free to email me after this, but thank you very much. Appreciate it.